Hey there, and welcome to Be Unmessable with the podcast. I am your host, Josselyne Herman-Saccio, and today is our tip of the week. So it's kind of a turbo episode, and I want to talk about suffering because when I work with people in coaching them, one of the things that we have to deal with initially is any place in their life where they're suffering. Now, suffering doesn't have to mean like overtly freaking out and weeping and heaving. It could be anything on the entire scale of suffering, from just struggling with or resisting or putting up with to overt suffering. And any place where you're suffering, consider there is something that you're confusing with reality. So what do I mean by that? I mean, there are things that happen, and then there's our response or our reaction to what happened, our thoughts about it, our feelings about it, our interpretation, our view, our opinion about what happened. And oftentimes we confuse those two things, and that's what leads to suffering. So I'll give you an example from my life. I had a situation way back, when I was in my early 20s, where my brother, who was 15 years older than me, was diagnosed with HIV. And it was not, back then it was a death sentence. And, it was not imminent. I didn't know when he was going to pass away, but I was clear he was going to pass away. And I remember sitting with him at the side of his hospital bed. And I said to him, I'm really afraid you're going to die. And he said, I am going to die. And here he was in pain, right? So pain doesn't necessarily mean suffering. He was dealing with that he was going to die. It was not a question, it was a question of when, which is really the truth about all of us. But for him, it was a bit more imminent than it was for me, seemingly. And he was not suffering. And he said, I'm not afraid to die. And I said, well, okay. I go, how can you just not be afraid to die? I mean, I'm afraid you're going to die. And he said, well, I've done everything I wanted to do in my life. I'm complete with the people in my life. I don't have anything undone. I don't have regrets. I don't have resentments. My heart is clean and my life is complete. So death is not something to be afraid of. So I remember thinking about that and thinking, wow, I wish someday I will get to that point. And most of the people I was afraid about dying, it wasn't so much about me dying, it was about other people dying, right? So meanwhile, flash forward, my brother did pass away in 1990. And a few months later, I was sitting on a bus and I started to be really sad. Now, this is not grief. Grief is appropriate. When you lose somebody, it's appropriate to grieve. But grief, when it goes into a story for too long, turns into suffering. And suffering is optional. You do not have to suffer, even when people pass away. So there I was on the bus, and I was having thoughts like, nobody should bury a child. This is so tragic. I wish they would get their act together with the AIDS crisis. This is not fair. And all of a sudden, I heard myself saying all this. And I thought to myself, okay, well, that's actually not what happened. What happened is my brother died. That's what happened. And then there was all this view and story and opinion and good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't, all surrounding what happened. But it didn't at the moment seem like something separate. It seemed like that was what happened. What happened was unfair. What happened shouldn't have happened. And in the moment of my being able to separate what happened, which is my brother died, from all that other stuff that I was saying about what happened, the suffering disappeared. And in the next moment, I asked myself, how would my brother want me to be feeling right now? How would he want me to be being right now? And the answer was definitely not suffering. That is not something he would ever wish upon anyone, especially me. And I, decided to, okay, instead of reacting to my story about death or my shoulds and shouldn'ts and not fairness and all of the stuff that I was adding to what happened, which was that he died, I was going to create how I was going to view his death. And I created that I was going to create honoring my brother's life, and that my life was going to honor my brother's life, and my thoughts were going to honor my brother's life, not be sad about it. And I am sad sometimes. I miss him, but it passes very quickly because I don't dwell into the story as if it's what happened. What happened is my brother died. And being able to be with the facts as distinct from everything that we could add to the facts and then collapse with the facts. And that's what I meant by I was confusing things, or my clients confuse things when they suffer. When I separated those worlds, I was able to disappear the suffering. And this is some of the work that I do with the people that I work with. So if you are dealing with something in your life right now that you are struggling with, that you are suffering with, that you are putting up with or trying to change or just uncomfortable about, try doing what I talked about in this episode, actually getting clear about what happened as separate from, distinct from what you thought about what happened, your opinion about it, your good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't, fair, unfair, whatever that whole world of interpretation and story and view that we add to what happened. See if you can keep them separate and notice what happens to what you're calling suffering. See if it disappears. And please message me, email me, and let me know what you discover. And in the notes of this episode, in the show notes, I'm going to give you a gift. It's a free PDF of my book, Peace Promises, which is a 30-day program designed to have you create more peace in your life. And peace and suffering cannot coexist. You can have pain, you can have grief without suffering. They're not necessarily connected. So let me know if this episode made a difference for you. Please write a review and rate the episode. If you could take a minute to do that, it makes a big difference. And by all means, share it with anyone that you think it would make a difference for. We'll see you on the next episode of Be Unmessable With, the podcast.